Right, next up, we'll be hearing the South African perspective on regulation surrounding age assurance. So Mashilo is the CEO of the Film and Publication Board, an online content regulatory authority in the Republic of South Africa. He's a passionate ambassador for online safety policy, and he serves as the chair of the Steering Committee on Harmonization of Content Regulation in Africa. And I believe you also sit on the Global Online Safety Regulators Network. That's a bit of a mouthful, alongside other regulators like Julian Mangran and Jill Whitehead. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm going to share with you what are the status of age assurance in South Africa. We've got seriously a lot of challenges, but the good thing is that from a policy point of view, as I'll share with you, we have made huge strides. This is the table of content. I don't want to waste a lot of time on it. But the most important thing for me is the challenges as well as the future. I think it's quite interesting to hear two speakers referring to the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, Martin, as well. I think on the future, share some of the development on the international front. I think Tony and Ian were in Geneva together earlier in February to talk about this. Trying to push various governments for heavy minimum standards passed, because we are a regulator, and without standards it becomes very, very difficult to know what is that we can push on. And I think all of us understand that many of the presentation have highlighted this, that all of us are interested in ensuring that our children consume content that is appropriate to their age. And at the moment, that hasn't been happening, and all these parental controls that we have, especially for a classification authority like ours, haven't been effective enough. And then there's also, like I indicated, lack of minimum standards that we can enforce compliance with, especially from a regulatory side. So who is the FPB? The FPB is an online content regulator, statutory, in the same as Ofcom or even eSafety. So we are actually three regulators in one, in the sense that I think in the UK you've got the British Board of Film Classification, New Zealand they've got New Zealand Classification Office or Australian Classification Board. So first part that we have been doing for a long period of time has been on the classification of movies and so forth. Movies, games, videos, providing ratings for that. But since 2019, Parliament passed a new law called the Film and Publication Amendment Act, which came into operation on March 2022. In other words, they gave us about 2 years to put in place some regulatory measures before we could start implementing the Act. That gave us the scope around online safety. Hence, now we've got a mandate over online safety. So that combines classification plus online safety. Now, this is the legislative provision. In other words, we regulate as an online safety regulator what you call in South African context harmful content, which has got psychosocial harm. I think in other jurisdictions you have what you call restricted. I think in England you call it illegal. With us we call it prohibited content. We've got two categories, harmful and prohibited. Prohibited is the one that which we define from time to time. It includes content that creates that causes harm, incite violence, hate speech, and so forth. So we determine that from time to time. Misinformation and fake news will still be considered as part of that. But this is what we do. In other words, we classify, we register online distributors in South Africa, for instance, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Meta, whether it's Google, for them to operate in South Africa and distribute videos, games and whatever. They must register with us first. And then secondly, well, like I said, classification, and then we protect children from online harms. That's why we sit on InHope, and then we conduct online safety, and finally we ensure compliance with the provisions of the Act. But what are some of the services that we regulate, which has got, or which embed age assurance for the purpose of this discussion? One, obviously, is classification, in the sense that we issue ratings that will tell which kind of content can be watched by whatever age groups. And then we also regulate internet access and service providers around, and search engines, those kind of services that you also have in the online safety. We regulate them as well. And then we also grant certificates and exemptions for certain entities to distribute content in South Africa. And then the last one, I think, is the processing of child information and reporting requirements. I'll talk about that, what we mean in South Africa. Obviously, these are the in South African context, the Constitution, obviously, and then the protection of information, which you call the GDPR in Europe. In South Africa, is done by an information regulator, and then we are also governed by our own act. And this is very interesting. South Africa, even though we haven't really implemented fully age assurance, we started talking about this single digital regulatory system as far back as 2016 with the policy, but we haven't implemented that. And for us, the reason why we want to talk about this is that all services that are within the scope of film and publication, which I've mentioned, user services, search engines must, because they process information in one way or another, then they must equally comply with the protection of the Information Personal Protection of Information Act. Now, which prohibits fundamentally the processing of child information, except under those conditions. One is that must be prior consent, I think, same as anywhere else, prior consent of a competent person, establishment for research and others. And then, it's as an obligation to the law. In other words, when the law requires that, like in our case, then you can process it. And then also, if it serves public interest, you can process it, subject to safeguards being put in place. Now, and the other one is that in case it is impossible or it will be involved disproportionate effort to ask consent. So if it's difficult for you to ask consent, you can still do that, subject to proper safeguard being put in place. Now, these are the conditions under which you can process information relating to the child. And the child in South Africa, we don't have these variations. Simple, 18, anything or any person under the age of 18 is considered a child. So it's just and it's even in the Constitution as well. So whether for driving, whether for consumption of alcohol, for anything below 18 is considered a child. Anything above 18 is an adult. Now, these are how the services that are within the FP Act, like I've mentioned, all of those that I've listed there. And the other one that I've forgotten, which is quite key, you'll see how we deal with that. It's a challenge for us, is exhibitors of adult content. In other words, premises that sell adult content, as well as the certain publications, like if you sell an adult magazine. And I think I want to talk about that because our age assurance actually is very strong on those than any other. And that's where I think the discussions the last 2 days begin to say, how do we implement this? Because if we have to implement the way that the law has outlined it, there's going to be, South Africa has got a very vocal civil society movement, because I think you'll see why I'm saying that. Now, what are the reporting requirements and conditions for distributors? In other words, the law is very specific. It says that any person who's registered as a film or game distributor in terms of the FP Act, unless exempted, must ensure to the satisfaction of the FPB that children under the age of 18 will not be able to access such film or game. Secondly, ensure that classification and age restrictions are closely displayed on the screen of the user throughout the screen. Thirdly, the user must confirm that he or she is under 18 or older prior to commencing viewing of the playing of games. That's why I think we got on TV, we got parental controls, but their effectiveness is something else. And that number D is that the distributor shall not distribute any promotion of the film or game to be accessed without it being paid for by way of credit card or another child secure method agreed to by the FPB. Now, I think the discussions that I had is that you shouldn't get information beyond that which you need. But the moment you say people must provide purchase services through credit card, already there's track of information that may be beyond that which is required. And this is the other one that's very important. Keep solely for his or her private records a register of all instances where access was granted to a user whose name, address, and verifiable age must be noted in the register kept for that purpose. 2, the register referred above must be kept for 1 year. I think yesterday I asked about the duration. Once you contain this information, how long can you keep it? And others said, no, once the services has been, age has been verified, then immediately you dispose of the information. But in our case, because it requires that we must ensure compliance with the Act, the owners of adult stores should keep this information so that the day that as the FPB we go there and check whether they comply with the Act, they must be able to show us the register. But how does the Act provide for checks and balances? It says that because the Act, FPB acts through its chief executive officer, it's only on once you approach the court and say, we request store A to give us a register, that's when you can access the register. But that register must be kept for a period of 1 year. That shows that indeed my services were never accessed by anyone under the age of 18. And how do we see that? Through the register that will say, this is the personal details of the people that viewed used my service for that period. And then we have the powers, to investigate, to check whether indeed this person has been complying or this entity has been complying. And then obviously there are penalties, huge penalties, as you can see, 750,000 in rents for anyone who's imprisoned or found to have been violated these provisions, or 5 years, whether sometimes it's the penalty or just the financial penalty, or sometimes it's imprisonment and the fine that a person is to pay. So now this one, this provision is related to the internet service providers. Equally, they must register with us if they want to distribute content, or if they know that there are services or they provide services that are likely to be accessed by children. And then the law provides that they must take all reasonable steps to prevent the use of their services for hosting or distribution of child pornography. And then they must equally take those reasonable steps. And then the other one is, and I think for us this is the very key element, the preservation of evidence that indeed their services haven't been accessed by the children. And I think for many of the discussions I had, like I mentioned earlier, that once age has been verified, you dispose of. But with us, there must be that evidence to say that indeed there hasn't been any underage child accessing the services. So I think that's the challenge that we have, and how do we deal with this moving forward? And then these are the fines, obviously, for an individual. So we got all the different fines, like I've mentioned in the Act. For this ones are for the internet access or internet service providers. And then we got what you call to comply, to ensure compliance, we got the compliance officers whose task, they've got the powers to enter into buildings and ensure that all there's compliance with the provisions of the Act, like I've highlighted, whether they seize material and look at the register as well, and issue compliance notices. And the Act, in addition, says our own minister can request the Minister of Police to have police officers within the FPB to assist in compliance. So this helps in terms of whether we get the warrant of arrest or seize, to go and seize and search some buildings. So what we have done in terms of the implementation, I think that's what we normally do. We normally ask the distributors, say, what are you doing on this? Others will give us information, but we haven't been hard on it. It's only this year that we said this will be our priority, age assurance, because I think it's a new issue. We hope to put, especially looking at for those that provide child-oriented services per the Act, as well as those internet and access service providers. However, where we haven't done well is on the exemptions in respect of the distribution. Where can we exempt them? And I think the Act is very clear. If you don't give us if you provide the FPB misleading information, there's a penalty set aside for that, including the possibility of your distribution license being withdrawn or suspended in South Africa. Now, what are the challenges? I think this is the law. I mean, the Act provides for that. You can see from a legal point of view, irrespective of the imperfections that I've highlighted, at least we've got legal provisions that allow us to act in a particular way, especially enforcing age assurance and verification. But what we don't have is a single verification system in South Africa. And I think that's where lies the challenge. That's why when I met Tony and Ian, I think I realized that, I think these are we can start these partnerships and start pushing for this kind of things. And the other issue that I've raised is lack of international agreed standards. We were attending the Children Online Protection Study Group at ITU, which has been saying this matter must be taken off the agenda of the study group, which looks at cybersecurity. We said, no, there are a lot of standard issues that must be dealt with, and we try to push for various governments to at least have a treaty, because that's what UN agencies do, on minimum standards that can be enforced. And then the other issue that I think faces us as South African, I think in other parts of the world, children protection versus the intrusion of privacy. Like if you have seen what is now provision, we've got no doubt that the moment we start implementing this, the civil society movements will be on our case, talking about issue of constitutionality and so forth. So I think there's that thin line, but as a regulator, that's what you have to do. Whether the law is perfect or not, you are not the interpreter of the law. You only implement the law. And like I said, I think for us is, while South Africa offers adequate protection of individual fundamental rights and so forth, I think at the moment there's still challenge around the enforcement capacity. Because imagine, like on rating, content rating, what measures can we put in? Parental controls have become difficult. And yesterday I had a discussion with Julie on a two-step approach. In other words, self-declaration plus something else. Because in the TV now we don't have anything. So once a child has got access to your PIN code, which is what you use, then he's got access to any kind of content that as a parent you watch. And I think I'm saying so also within the context of, there's a research that was done by the University of South Africa, which indicated that most of the children under the age of 9 in South Africa who access pornographic material, they access that from the phones of their own parents. Because these gadgets use algorithms, and they know what kind of content you watch. While the child, you are saying, cell phones are used for parenting these days. So you borrow your child or your little daughter a phone, and then while she's playing with it, pornographic content pops up. So that's the issue. So once you have gone through the parental controls or the PIN, what's next? There isn't anything like age verification, particularly on television. And I think we need to do all this risk assessment to look at. And I think someone said it profoundly, that in our attempt to implement age assurance, we should guard against, creating more risk for the child. So that balancing act is very, very important. But as the regulator, ours won't be like providing any specific technologies. We'll be saying these are the principles around age assurance. The future, obviously, I think the collaboration, because you are processing personal information, the relationship with your data protection regulator is quite key. And even in South Africa, that's what we are trying to work on. And we hope that our government will be able to push through the policy on a single digital identity verification system, because this is also key to that. And then the at global level, I think Martin said it earlier, we at Global Online Safety Regulators Network, because this requires international collaboration, we have created a technology working group, and we hope all these ideas that are coming out of this discussion should be able to permeate through those kind of forums, because the regulators are the when we are growing, represent regulators from, I think, all the continents. ACOM being the newest member, you got ACOM Fiji, Ireland, South Africa, Korea, and then we got what you call observers who are mostly not regulator or non-regulator. So I think for us, the discussions that are happening here should be able to influence the discussions that are happening at the regulator level. And we want to push, again, we want to appeal to all of you, because without government support, this becomes very, very difficult in terms of making sure that there are policies. And once again, thank you very much for the opportunity and inviting someone from the tip of Africa to come and address you on this important matter. I think we are learning a lot out of this discussion, and we hope that from South Africa's point of view, the discussions will help us to, gain more traction, not only in South Africa, but also in on the continent as a whole. David and I have been trying to push to make sure that topics like this also get traction. He's from Botswana. Together, we have been trying to make sure that this kind of discussion on online safety get traction on the continent and push forward. And once again, thank you very much for listening.
We've got some time for questions if you're happy to take any. Do we have any questions in the room? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Pratishtha from India. Where you mentioned about the point of CSAM and child sexual content that is there, I just want to focus upon that and highlight what are the ways of detecting CSAM content on various platforms that are regulated in South Africa? If you can just highlight upon that a bit. How do you identify content, and then how do you regulate that content when it comes to the global platforms, when we talk about Meta, TikTok, and other platforms?
We've got a team of online monitors who, detect using technology to do that. But we also, and I think that's what we want to borrow from the European Union around Digital Services Act, what you call trusted flaggers. Because what it does, it says you as the regulator, because no one can really monitor this environment, online environment alone. Is huge, it's massive. So you can allow third parties that you license to be able to help you in identifying that. So the first part on our side is, one, our own online monitors. Two, we request the companies to assist us in that regard. That's why we always request them, give us reports as to how many materials have you removed, so they allow us to do that. Then the second part, which also help us, is what you call public complaints. In other words, any member of the public can, when they see content that is harmful and prohibited, alert us, and even the platform which it appears, then we can refer. The first step normally is to alert the platform owner to say that this kind of content is prohibited or not complying with the act. We request that you take it down. Particularly if it involves the child. But if it is prohibited, which is more discretionary kind of, then there should be investigation that we follow. But the one that involves the child immediately is take down. There's no negotiations on that. So it requires that multi-sectoral approach. It involves the public, involving you as the regulator and the platform owners as well, because it's a massive and very vast environment. And you can't do it, even when you've got a lot of technology. But I think the trusted flagger model will be good in terms of assisting the regulators. And I think we want to borrow from it as well.
Great. In that case, let's wrap up there. Thank you so much, Mashilo.
Thank you very much.